Good afternoon. I'm Ty Schmidt, Chief of Police for the City of Champlin. Thank you for joining us today. This is a public meeting regarding public notification of a predatory offender who has moved into Champlin. Community notification of level 3 predatory offenders is mandated by state statute for any level 3 predatory offender that moves into a community. Today, we're going to have Brad Vandervet from Minnesota Department of Corrections and Allison Fay from the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center speaking during our presentation. We'll also have Dana Fedema from the Hennepin County Corrections Intensive Supervision Unit and Elsa Swenson from Home Free Victim Advocacy available for any questions that may come up. The presentation will be recorded and it will be accessible through the City of Champlin website or the Champlin Police Department YouTube channel after we're all done today. During the live portion of the meeting, we will take questions over Zoom chat. For anyone who views this presentation in the recorded format, you can submit questions through the email address that will be available at the end of the presentation. We are going to leave the chat function turned off for the majority of this meeting because many of your questions are going to be answered during Brad's presentation. We'll turn it on toward the end and we'll take questions at that point. So if you try to get into the chat and you can't get in right away, don't worry about it. It will be turned on a little bit later on in the presentation. So I'm going to turn this over to Brad.
Thank you, Chief. And thank you for taking the time out of your day to review this important information, whether you're here with us live or joining us and watching the recorded version. As you heard, my name is Brad Vandervet, and I am with the Minnesota Department of Corrections in the Risk Assessment and Community Notification Unit. And today, my presentation is really going to come in 3 distinct parts as we get going. I'm going to begin with some of those foundational components of the broader state risk management system. And then I'm going to use that information as an overlay as we get into specific information about the man you're here to learn about today. And then I'll transition into some helpful resources as you're working to apply all of this into your personal family and broader community safety planning efforts. And so where I like to begin with meetings like this is at a place where we all have a basic or more fundamental understanding. And that is that those people who engage in this type of harm, sexual harm, they exist. And really the question becomes more as to what is it that we as agencies, state, county, and city agencies are doing when we are able to take one of those individuals who's been identified and move them through that risk management system. And so that's where I really want to kind of jump in today. So one of the first kind of pillars or main components of that broader risk management system is the registry. Now, the registry began in 1991 and was really predicated and founded on the advocacy work of the Jacob Wetterling family following his abduction. And the family and advocates went around to local law enforcement and really asked the question, what more can we do to assist you as law enforcement agencies in your efforts to effectively manage and police this unique population of individuals? And what law enforcement really resoundingly said is we need a system that collates our data so that it can be easily accessed across departments and agencies. So it's not warehoused or siloed within an agency's file system only to be shared after the fact. And so the registry was really born out of that. And as you can see, it retains and attains and compiles a great deal of specific information and detail about those individuals that are subject to it. Information like their primary address or any secondary addresses that they may frequent. Think of places like vacation homes or properties or the homes of significant others. If they're going there with some frequency, that secondary address must also be made known to law enforcement. The registrants must also inform law enforcement of all of their employment. And if they're operating a motor vehicle for that employer, that information must be made known as well. Any schools that they're attending must be being owed to law enforcement, and any vehicles that they themselves either use, own, or possess, or may operate, or even that old broken down car on the side of the driveway must also be made known to law enforcement. Other components of the registry are identifying things like scars, marks, or tattoos, phone numbers, and storage units even of the registrant if they rent like a storage locker or something like that. So you can see the robustness of the registry so that law enforcement can quickly pare down lists in their area of operation should the need ever arise to focus in on any particular group or individual. So the next question that often comes up in meetings like this then is, with those who are subject to the registry, what has changed, or how has this adapted over the years? And many of you may remember the registry was initially known as the Sex Offender Registry, but the state really saw the benefit and effectiveness of this system and grew it to include not only sex-specific crimes, but also convictions or charges of crimes such as kidnapping and false imprisonment. And so the name had to change to the Predatory Offender Registry. And a simple way to keep it straight as we go forward today is this, is that all registered sex offenders are predatory offenders, while not all predatory offenders are sex offenders. So just use that as a simple way to kind of keep it straight as we get into more detail. Now, with the registry, the information that it collects and maintains is deemed private data by law, and as such can only be used for law enforcement purposes and correctional purposes. However, for meetings like this, we're able to take a kind of a 30,000-foot flyover snapshot view of what's going on throughout the state to show you just what's really out there. And as you can see from this information, first I want to put in your mind an analogy of a funnel. And I want you to think of at the widest end of that funnel are those incidences of sexual harm that occur. And from what we know of those offenses and incidences that occur, only a portion will ever go on to be reported to law enforcement. And of those reported to law enforcement, only a portion of those will go on to receive formal charges. And of those charged, only a portion of that group will go on to receive sentences. And of those sentenced, only a portion of that group will go on to cross the threshold of a prison. And I'll get into why that's a unique or important distinction here in a moment. So as you're thinking about this funnel narrowing down, we are well past the midway point when we get to our list of registered individuals. And you can see here, as of the first of this year, we had approximately 18,727 registered individuals. That's all of them in the state of Minnesota. That's registrants with no risk level assigned, or those assigned levels 1 through 3. And you can see as of today, when I most recently took this snapshot, the breakdowns in and around the Champlin community. One thing I want to mention about these numbers is that they are dynamic. They are fluctuating and changing with some frequency, as this population of individuals does move with some frequency. But as you can see here from this information, in Hennepin County, there were 2,785 registered individuals, again, all of them, reporting residents, primary residents within Hennepin County. Of that group, 158 are those subject to that broad public notification. So you see this funneling effect going even further. Only 158 of that group were able to share and talk about more broadly. As you look at the city of Champlin, you can see there are 34 of that 2,785 that reside here within the city. Prior to this meeting, you may not have thought there were any registered individuals residing within the community, but this is why these meetings are so important, is it's an opportunity to show you just all the hard work your police department is performing day in and day out. Now, as of today, or as of the move-in date of the man you're here to learn about, that number 1 represents this individual who is subject to that broad public notification. And you can go down the list and you can see other neighboring communities. The one thing I like to point out here, the larger number on the left are all registrants, the smaller number on the right are those subject to broad public notification, is that across the state, regardless of where we look, we find registered individuals residing in those communities. And most certainly, even if there's a city or a township where they don't reside, the odds are that they're moving or passing through that area at some point, because it's where they're spending their waking hours. We want people to have their most heightened awareness. So use this as kind of a foundational overlay as to the broadness and the scope of this important information. So another component or pillar of that state risk management system that I want to share with you today is the Community Notification Act. Now you can see the Notification Act came online in 1997 and is really founded on the understanding and research that has shown that a well-informed community is in fact a safer community. And we in the Department of Corrections commend and thank the Champlin Police Department in all of its efforts to ensure that this information, good, solid information, is getting proliferated out as best possible to the community here. So because the Notification Act is the very reason we're here providing information today, it's worth going into some additional information as to how that functions and works. Now, you recall from my earlier slide with all the numbers that not all registered individuals are subject to notification or even have a level assigned. So in order for a registered individual, registered predatory offender to get a risk level assessed and signed, they must have crossed the threshold of a prison. Not jail, but prison. So that can be obviously any prison within the state of Minnesota or any prison within the United States, to include US territories, any federal prison and military prison. Those individuals are subject to risk level assessment and assignment. And you'll see, in addition to that group that crossed the threshold of prisons, this law includes those individuals who have been civilly committed for sex offending conduct or behavior. So they are also subject to that level assessment and assignment. But as we've talked about, there's a group that is not subject to that level of assessment. And that is the group of individuals that are adjudicated as juveniles for juvenile offenses and crimes, or those individuals who have been convicted by the court, but received or were granted a stayed sentence, a probationary sentence, where they were allowed to remain in the community under the supervision of a probation agent with a list of terms and conditions that they must abide by. And so for as long as they abide by those conditions and follow through and ultimately go on to expiration, they will not be subject to a level assessment or assignment. So with focusing in now, as we're honing in on that group that does cross that threshold, the next question that comes up is, well, then who does what? How does this all break down? As you can see, the Department of Corrections is tasked with the responsibility of assessing and assigning that risk level. And that is done through the End of Confinement Review Committee, or the ECRC. The ECRC will convene 90 days prior or earlier to that registrant's release back into the community, and they will assign a risk level. The way this is conducted and done is through the Risk Assessment and Community Notification Unit. We compile all available data on that registrant, any reports, from index reports from law enforcement to criminal complaints to treatment summaries and collateral contact information and so on, and given to an assessor who does a forensic interview with the registrant and sits down with all of the information available to them and then conducts this interview. And then once all that information and detail is gained, it's run through our risk assessment tool known as the MinSOST, or the Minnesota Sex Offender Screening Tool. This tool is important to have at least some understanding of and knowledge, because it is what informs risk levels throughout the state. So the way this tool was created was it was born out of a robust study conducted right here in our state by the Department of Corrections. This study began in the early 90s when these laws first started coming online and concluded in its initial phase in the early 2000s. So over a decade's research where the DOC followed 3,166 known sex offenders into the community at their times of release and marked their successes and their failures. And a companion study was wrapped up in 2012 where another over 2,000 individuals, so 5,000 altogether, were studied and reviewed. This information was all compiled and then submitted through the rigors of the scientific review process and created the normed risk assessment tool known as the MNSOST. So when I speak today about a leveled individual being a level 1, 2, or 3, know that I'm speaking specifically to that group of their peers from that study. So if I say a level 1 individual, know that they possess a lower amount of those known predictive risk factors as compared to that peer group. A level 2 has a moderate amount, and a level 3 has a higher amount. One thing to make sure you keep in mind as you're thinking about this risk assessment tool is that risk is not static. It is quite the opposite. It is very dynamic and does fluctuate and change. And while these tools are fantastic in assisting both corrections and law enforcement in applying their resources most appropriately to mitigate that risk, and they're very good at doing that, the one thing they cannot do is predict the future. And so once that end of confinement review committee runs through that entire process and determines a risk level assignment, the handoff then goes to our partners in law enforcement. And as you can see here, law enforcement then provides notification within the scope of that level assigned. So for a level 1 individual, law enforcement will provide notification to other law enforcement agencies. They will provide notification to victims of or witnesses to the offense if they've requested that level of enhanced notification. And they will also provide notification to those immediate adult household members residing in that home with that registrant. And that is the scope of a level 1 notification. Now, a level 2 notification builds upon those individuals and entities we just described and includes other individuals or entities that law enforcement has determined to be at specific risk based on that individual's known pattern of offending conduct and behavior. And so it's often believed that with a level 2, that law enforcement will provide notification to places like daycares, churches, schools, places where children are known to congregate and frequent. And while that very well may be true, it is not always the case. So for an example, in a case where a level 2 is entering the community and law enforcement receives that dossier of information from the risk assessment unit and determines that this individual, this level 2, focuses their conduct and behavior against adult females at social gatherings. Think places like bars or concert venues or something along that line. In that situation, law enforcement may determine it serves no benefit to provide notification to a daycare that serves children, their primary clientele ages infancy to school aged. Rather, they may focus that notification on those proprietors of those bars or venues and say, if you see this individual here, let us know, we'd like to come out and see what may be going on. On the flip side, if law enforcement has a level 2 notification and they see that this individual focuses their conduct and behavior on minor children that are unaccompanied in the community, and they know, think kids in transit from school to after school programs or home. And law enforcement knows in our community, we have a teen hangout spot where they congregate and socialize in those down times. Now, in that scenario, law enforcement may very well go to the proprietor of that teen hangout spot and do the very same thing and say, if you see this person here loitering around or making relationships or contacts with these children, let us know. we'd like to send out an officer to find out more about what they may be up to. And so that is the nuance of a level 2 notification. And then on to the level 3 notification, which is that broad public notification. And that can come in many, and it does come in many, a variety of ways and formats, and really does come down to how law enforcement communicates best with its community. And again, we recognize and commend the police department and all of its efforts to get this information out today. So I want to switch gears now and use some of the information gained from those research studies that I think are going to be the most beneficial to help you as you start to apply this into those family and community safety planning efforts. So at that narrowest end of that funnel now, this is those individuals coming out of prison with a risk level assigned. You can see here, and this is an average because the number of individuals that do cross the threshold does fluctuate and change year after year. But on average, we see that the breakdowns tend to stay pretty much this way, where the majority of levels assigned are those of levels 1 and 2. 15%, again, on average, are those assigned risk levels of 3. And that's the group we get to share more broad information on and about. But a lot can be gained by understanding and knowing that group, because the information we are able to provide with them can be applied more broadly into all the different interactions that your loved ones may be engaging in throughout the community and beyond. A quick snapshot of the public registrant search function. This is the website maintained by the Department of Corrections, where all current leveled individuals subject to broad public notification can be found. You can go onto the Department of Corrections website right now, go down to the locator tab, select the public registrant search function. And if you were to say, at least as of this afternoon, early afternoon when I ran these numbers, and again, they're dynamic, they do fluctuate and change, but you could select the button that says show them all to me, and you will see there are 476 individuals throughout the state of Minnesota. And again, where they reside is obviously something we want to be aware of, but we also know that they are crossing city lines, county lines, and in some cases, even state lines, day in and day out for a variety of reasons. And so that broad awareness is just so critical. You can also look and see that at this moment, we have 12 of those registrants who are out of compliance with the registry and need to be brought back in. So if you were to take a look at them and see someone that you may recognize or see as familiar, certainly do let law enforcement know, and they will be eager to assist those individuals in returning to compliance with our registry. Other information I want to share with you today as you're contemplating those family safety plans is the breakdown of the relationships between those who engage in this type of harm and the people they hurt. Now, this data is actually pulled from the U.S. Department of Justice in a similar study that they conducted in 2000. But I like to put it in here just so you have some variety of the information I'm throwing at you today. But we find that it aligns very much with the information of our own research. And that is, as you can see, that the majority of those who harm people in a sexual manner are known to the people they hurt. They use that relationship to manipulate that trust and that access that they have gained. What you'll notice is that smaller percentage, about 7%, fall into that stranger category. And this is what gives us the most pause as families and communities, because this is that group we don't have direct control or influence over. And so it's worth breaking down a little bit further just what the limitations of this study were. The assessors or the researchers had to create a cutoff, and they determined that cutoff would be 24 hours. If they could not show through their data that there was a knowing or an acquaintanceship between the offender and the victim of 24 hours or greater, then they would put them into the stranger category. Now, this would include inevitably scenarios like this, where two teens meet up at a local house party. They didn't know each other prior to this. The night's going the way it's going. They hit it off and they leave the group to an isolated location. and the night takes an awful turn. This would be counted into that stranger category. But what we tend to think of more as families and communities when we think of strangers is that person lurking just outside of our awareness, just beyond the scope of our knowledge, who has ill intent. That group tends to fall in an even smaller percentage of about 3%. Now that is cold comfort, I'm very well aware. But as you're thinking today about how to best apply your resources most effectively, what I do not want is for you to be pouring every bit of energy into that 3% group when we know from our data that it's much more likely to be somebody abusing a relationship. So keep that in mind as we go into more information here. My last bit of data, as you're looking to add these things into those safety planning efforts, is on the age breakdowns of those harmed by sexual violence. And as you can see here, it's broken into thirds, but pretty quickly you're going to look to those ages on the side and you're going to see that 2/3 of this group are children. And you're going to look even closer and see that the narrowest age range up there, that 13 to 17 age range, constitutes 33% of those harmed. That's a staggering number. That's about 9% of the population and worth looking at further. So what we know as trusted adult support people, parents and community members, is that the loved ones, the safe adults, are still very much vetting and controlling and managing who gets to have those all too important relationships with their children in those early age times, as 0 to 12 range. And so we as agencies want to make sure we're providing the best information and resources to those trusted support people so that they can apply it most effectively. But what inevitably happens is the very thing that we as a community strive to achieve in our neighborhoods. And that is a safe place where our teens can go out to start to express their own individuality and their own autonomy. And they deserve every bit of that. But now they are formulating relationships outside of that watchful gaze of that trusted adult support network. And so what we've found in our collaborations and efforts working together with victim advocacy groups throughout the state is that we've gotten away from that older model of the talk, where we would pull our teen aside at that critical time that we decided on as parents or loved ones, and we'd remove the veil just enough to show them that the world is not as safe as it had been made to be for them when they were younger. Now, what we found with that older model was we'd get really one of two pretty distinct reactions out of our teens. Either one, we would get just full-on rebuke from our teen: "Dad, you're overreacting. My friends are fine. Everything's okay." Or on the other side, we'd get, "This is the most frightening information I could ever have heard, and I'm no longer going to engage in those things I love most in life." And neither reaction is what we want or what we seek. So what we've found is that the new model, the more effective way, is to have a lot of little talks with our children all the way up and through into those critical teenage years. Those talks building on one another in an age-appropriate fashion all the way along, so that by the time our children reach those critical ages, they have a robust toolbox to utilize if they find themselves in a situation that they are confronted with the potential of harm or risk. And so I will stop there with the victim information, because there's so much more that you're going to be getting today from our partners at the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center. So now I want to switch gears and take all of the information that I've provided you this far and use it as that overlay as we get into the specific details about the man you're here to learn about today. This is Mr. Webster. First, I want to speak about photographs. Photographs are updated on average of annually, or should the subject significantly change their appearance. So if you were to see Mr. Webster in the community and see that he has modified his appearance in such a way that he no longer looks like these photos, certainly do let law enforcement or his agent or both know, and they will obtain updated photos and get those onto the registry, where then I will take them and ensure that they go on to that public registrant search tool, so that you will always have an accurate photographic depiction of him for as long as he is subject to public notification. These are Mr. Webster's vitals. He's currently 39 years of age and is residing in the 11,000 blocks kind of area of Winnetka Avenue North here in Champlin. Now, I want to take a moment to address another common question that comes up in meetings like this. And that question is Brad, can you tell us where this man lives? We would find so much comfort in knowing where his head hits the pillow at night. And as you recall from my earlier information, the details about the specific address, because it's collected and maintained by the registry, are not publicly available. However, we can accomplish a great deal with a proximal address in giving a vicinity, because no doubt those who live within this area will, if they have not already, become aware of this man as he comes and goes on his day-to-day business. And no doubt that information will be shared in and among that community. And that's just fine. But what we do not want as agencies is for that information to go out more broadly, so that somebody from well outside the Champlin community that has no stake in all that you've worked so hard to create and maintain here comes in and exacts some vigilante revenge scenario that does nothing to reduce risk of harm and does nothing to restore a victim, and only serves to disrupt those very things you work so hard to preserve here. And so that is why we utilize a proximal address. Other information, this is Mr. Webster's registrable offense summary. This comes right from the informational fact sheet that you may have already had access to or been provided. It is also verbatim, word for word, on that public registrant search tool that I've been talking about. So I want to get right into the details about what happened with regard to this man. Real quick, before I do that, I do want to mention with this registrable offense history, it is not an exhaustive criminal history. It specifically focuses on that conduct and behavior that placed him onto the registry and was utilized and compiled in ultimately determining that risk level assignment. So if you are interested in a full or complete history, you certainly can access that on the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension's website. And I'll give you their web address in a little bit. That said, I want to get right into the details. So in 2003, Mr. Webster was convicted of 2 separate counts of criminal sexual conduct in the 3rd degree out of Scott County. This was for a 2002 offense that occurred against a 13-year-old female victim. Mr. Webster was known to this victim and used that knowing and that relationship to exploit his access to her. He met up with her after hours at the school where she had attended a basketball game. And they had a verbal argument or disagreement of some kind. And she went to get away or to move away from him, get space from him into the school building, where he then took her and escorted her out to his vehicle, where he then assaulted her. And for this crime, once it was reported and made known to law enforcement, he was found guilty and convicted to a 58-month commit to prison. Now, I want to take a moment and speak a little bit to the next question that will often come up in meetings like this. And that question is Brad, why is it that someone who engages in this type of harm that shocks the conscience, why do they get to come back out? Why are they allowed to re-enter communities where they may engage in harm again? And the answer lies in part here with determinate sentencing. Prior to determinate sentencing, our state had a model that's more familiar to people of parole. And the parole model is much like you see on TVs and movie shows and so on, consists of a panel or a board that determines whether or not an individual will get to re-enter the community at that time when they are eligible. That board would often, especially with crimes like this, again, that shock the conscience, would find that they would reject or deny parole. And those people would end up serving their entire sentence in prison. Now, upon hearing that, the community, back when we could sit in front of you directly, I would usually see a lot of people nod at me and say, yeah, that's just fine, Brad. This man can sit the entirety of his sentence. We're okay with that. But what we found through that research that we've been talking about was that that model failed to adequately address recidivism risk, or at least to the point where we knew we could do better. And so we began exploring, as did many states. In fact, almost all states have moved to this model of determinate sentencing, that we could have far greater impact, because that old way, when they expired from their time in prison, and they do expire, 90% of inmates today will expire from their time in prison and will come out into the community. We have very few life sentences. And what would happen was they get walked to the gate back then and told, don't come back. And it did not have that impact or effect. So with this model, what happens is they get assigned a particular amount of time broken into months, because by law, 2/3 will be served in the prison, in the institution, if they go to prison, and 1/3, again, by law, will be served in the community on supervised release. So no judge makes this decision, certainly no law enforcement agency makes this decision, no correctional agency makes this decision. The law dictates that at 2/3, they will re-enter the community. And this ensures that they have an opportunity, while still under the jurisdiction of the Department of Corrections, to integrate those skills and tools learned through their treatment in the rigorous programming that they've engaged in while in the institution out in the community effectively. They're being managed and supervised by their agents and by law enforcement more broadly. And if they find that they are not complying, even with the more basic expectations, they may be retaken into the institution to serve additional time. And then you can see here, there was a sentence enhancer. This is unique as well, and is part of that broader state risk management system that I've been speaking about, where a 58-month commit would be broken into that thirds, as we've been talking about. But with this particular type of crime, sexual harm, there's an additional 5 years tacked on to that third, that final third. So they have that extra time to be working with their corrections professionals in the community. And in fact, that's even been changed and modified in recent years. 5 years is no longer an option, it's 10 years. And so they have an additional decade working with corrections as they're reintegrating into the community, ensuring that they're adhering to those expectations that are known to mitigate risk. And so this is how they are coming out into the community while on supervision. Now, this is not his only sex crime. This is the one that brought him into prison. He was again brought before law enforcement's attention in 2008, this time for a criminal sexual conduct 5th degree offense out of Anoka County that occurred in 2007. You'll see here that this offense was not a felony level offense. This offense is a gross misdemeanor. And so it was a violation of his expectations from his felony time. He was still under supervision. What had happened was Mr. Webster was residing with his significant other and had left mood-altering substances at the home, knowing that it would be consumed by this person's, his significant other's teenage child and her friend. This was against a 17-year-old female victim. So this 17-year-old and her friend consumed this mood-altering substance while he left to go to work. He then returned late that evening after finishing his shift at work and assaulted the 17-year-old while she was asleep. Her friend woke and saw what had happened and told the 17-year-old after what had occurred, so that she would then go on to report it to her trusted adult support network, who then brought it to law enforcement. And for this crime, again, as a gross misdemeanor, he received a year sentence. And that ran concurrent because it was running alongside of that felony prison sentence from Scott County. So he was in prison for that entire time, as he'd been brought back into the institution for his failure to remain law-abiding violation. Now, fast forward, he then found himself outside of the scope of his registration requirements in 2012. Now, this is not a sex-specific crime, but it is connected directly to his expectations to comply with the state's registry. He had failed to inform law enforcement of critical information, and they did exactly as they do. They tracked him down and figured out what he was up to, and he was prosecuted for that. And with a failure to register, it is a felony level offense. He did enter into prison. It's actually a year and a day. I have a year jail there, but it's actually a year and a day in prison for that crime. And so this is the offense that he's actually under active supervision for, as he expired on his sex offenses. So here's his prison chronology as it breaks down, so you can kind of see it in real time. So in August 2003, he enters prison for that Crim Sex 3 out of Scott County, those two separate counts. He is assessed and assigned by the End of Confinement Review Committee, as you've heard me talk about, 90 days prior to his release. And then at his 2/3 release mark, that February 2006 date, he was assessed and assigned a risk level of 1. And so you can see already the dynamic process that occurs with risk level assessment and assignment. So a level 1 being the lowest level that can be assigned to somebody coming out of prison, enters onto supervised release into the community in 2006. We know in 2008, he gets revoked for that gross misdemeanor Crim Sex 5 against the 17-year-old victim, and is reassessed at his retaking. Anytime a registered individual returns to prison, regardless of why they come back, the End of Confinement Review Committee will look at them to determine whether or not risk level needs to be modified or changed. As you can see here, given the seriousness of his conduct while in the community, they determined just that his risk level needs to go up, and he was assigned a level of 3. So on February 5th of 2011, his governing file, remembering that gross misdemeanor file ran beneath the felony file, expired. Like we talked about, 90% of these guys will expire. And so he had his rights restored to him at expiration and re-entered the community. Now, 2012, we know for that failure to register, he comes back into prison for failing to comply with his registration requirements. And now, because he's a risk level 3, his supervised release has been changed or modified, again, another component of that broader risk management system, to intensive supervised release. And he came out on that final third of that failure to register file in 2018 and has been in the community from that point. And so this is a move for him, not a new release. He's been out in the community since 2018 under intensive supervised release. So as it sits right now for Mr. Webster, he is under direct correctional supervision for that failure to register until November 21st of 2023. Now, the registry has been modified here. Typically, somebody who's required to register is subject to it for a 10-year period or the duration of supervision, whichever is longer. But as you can see here, based on what brought him back, it was modified. Now he has to register for life. So although he will expire as long as he maintains his compliance with the expectations of his supervision agents, he will come off in 2023 and have those rights once again restored to him. He will, though, always have to inform law enforcement of where he lives, where he works, what he drives, etc. And for as long as he retains that risk level of 3, you will be able to see his information and know what's going on with him. So I want to take a moment and talk a little bit about intensive supervised release, because as I've pointed out, that is a new component that's being applied through that broader risk management system. ISR, as it's known, came online, actually predates the other two components I've talked to you about today. It actually came online in 1990 and is really kind of unique to Minnesota in that it structures caseloads to a very reduced size of about 15 individuals per agent. To give you some context, a standard supervised release agent, like one who would have been managing him when he was a level 1, will maintain a caseload on average of about 50 to 60 clients. And that's actually pretty manageable for one agent. So you can just see the level of intensity with ISR, 15 individuals per agent, that these agents get to know these people very, very well. And it really has shown to reduce that potential risk of recidivism in a very significant way. Remembering that the fundamental goal of this program is that successful reintegration into the community, because as you saw, supervision will expire. We need to ensure that we are instilling all those tools and skills that are going to keep his risk low and that he is using them and using them appropriately. So with ISR, there's a lot of different components at play. It starts with a very collaborative process from the institution side, from the prison side, where they work with caseworkers to formulate a plan around his release, to ensure the most stable and supportive environment possible. And that's a question that will often come up in meetings like this as well, is Brad, who chose this location? How is it that he can live here? It's next to a park, a playground, a school, places where children are known to ride their bikes or congregate. It's in a community. The answer is, when we look at those stable, supportive, mitigating factors, is that homelessness is our largest issue. If a homeless, high-risk individual only increases that risk further. They're harder to manage and monitor, and they're unstable in the community. So anything is better than homelessness. And then as we pursue more appropriate types of housing and opportunities, there is really genuinely no such thing as a perfect location or place. I have yet to have somebody from the community call me and say, I've got a great place next door where somebody who has a hard time finding a place to live can be. Certainly, if that were to ever come up, we'd take advantage of it. But we're looking for those things that mitigate risk. Any place, any community has those potential things. Any community you look at will have parks, playgrounds, places where children congregate. That is what a community is. So it is all looked at, weighed, and considered with that ultimate understanding that homelessness is our biggest issue to combat. GPS is utilized, at least on initial release, remembering that he's been out since 2018. It can certainly be utilized by agents anytime they see that there's a need, but it's a tool used usually for that very first 90-day reintegration back in. And again, he's been out since 2018. And so it is not actively being utilized, but like I say, it can come online should the need arise. ISR agents take these individuals at their release directly from the facility to where they're going to be, and they're on strict house arrest. Again, he's further along in his requirements, having been out for a period of time already. And again, that successful reintegration is that ultimate goal. Your ISR team operates much like your local law enforcement. They're not off duty. There's always an agent on call. Law enforcement has that access number. And so should they encounter him at any time in their duties, and have questions as to whether or not he has the ability to be where he is or to engage in whatever he's engaging in, the agent is at their disposal to assist them in their efforts as well. It is a very highly structured program. Their weeks are planned out in advance. Every week must be pre-planned with their agent, has to be approved, where they're going to go shopping at, the times they're going to go there, where they're going to go to work, et cetera, et cetera. They do not get to do anything impulsively. They don't get to just decide that they're going to go to the local park where there's an activity going on because they thought it looked like fun. They have to pre-plan everything in advance. And if that were something they wanted to be engaging in that scenario, the agent would work directly with their team to ensure that it's the safest possible way of doing it if it's going to be allowed to be done. frequent face-to-face contacts with the individual. These occur in all different locations, whether at their home, their primary residence, secondary residences, places of employment, or just when they're out on the free time in the community doing their shopping or whatever. They also, and all these visits are unannounced. So the individual never knows when an agent's going to pop out and see them. And that's intentional so that they never get too familiar with a particular schedule. Agents will do double backs. They'll see them once and then do something and then come right back and see them again. And daily contacts by phone. Again, they're calling in their schedule, reporting what they're going to do for the day so that everyone's on the same page and we know what he's going to be up to in the community. This is the agent, Bart, is going to be supervising him directly in the community. Again, Bart works with a team. Obviously, he's not on 24/7. And so him or his team can certainly assist you with any questions you may have that are specific to this individual. We do have his supervisor, Dana, here to answer questions when we get to the Q&A if you have any specific questions for how Hennepin County performs its supervision activities. But definitely keep his information there and available should you need it. Okay. As we're looking at resources, so now that you have the specific information about this man and the type of supervision he's going to be on, I want to give you some resources that are going to be there for you to look at and utilize as you're augmenting this into your safety planning efforts. Your first and best resource is and has been and will continue to be your local law enforcement. The Champlin Police Department, as you've seen, this is not a new population to them by any means. And they have their processes and procedures established. So if you have questions about just how those processes work, if more of a general type question, certainly contact their non-emergency number. But if you see this man or now anyone, as your awareness has been broadened, that's engaging in conduct that just raises the hair on the back of your neck or gives you concern, certainly be contacting law enforcement. Because as you know, with the tools they have at their disposal, they can do a far broader search to see if the person you're viewing or observing maybe is one of those individuals that is not more broadly known. Other information that I want to share with you about resources today is going to come from our colleagues and friends at the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center. And we're fortunate to have Allison Fay with us. Allison, if I could ask you to unmute.
I am so unmuted.
Awesome, awesome. I will click for you. Just let me know when you're ready.
Great, thanks for having me. I'm not going to take up too much time. Just basically for those of you who are here wanting to know what you can do in family planning with when it comes to safety and with safety for kids. One of the things that I would reiterate that Brad said is sadly, well, I've been to meetings like this and I've had parents walk up to me afterwards and say, I've never had to think about this before and now I do. And I wish we didn't have to think about sexual violence. I wish this wasn't something that we did have to address for prevention. But just as Brad said, these folks have always been there. The difference is now that we know about some of them. And so we want to raise our awareness with that person so that we know that that person exists, and especially with our teenagers having a conversation about the specifics, because we know that he's, as most offenders are, they look for relationships to cause harm. So just this is someone we don't want to be in relationship with as he works on what he's working on. If you advance the slide for me magically, Brad, that'd be lovely. And so thank you for being here, for making this a priority. We believe it's a kid's job to be a kid and it's the grown-up's job to keep them safe. And so the fact that we have so many adults here keeping them safe is phenomenal. And please, I know that this video is going to be recorded and put on the website, so you can send it to, if you have a partner who couldn't come today or a neighbor who wanted to get more information. Just a reminder that when we're talking about body safety, we don't focus on do we know them or not, in the sense of like focusing on are they a stranger or not. We focus on how are they acting and how do they make us feel. We don't focus on the relationship because in almost every case of child abuse, and especially with our 11 to 17-year-olds, that's someone that the teen or the child knows. And so we want them to know, we don't want them to be scared of everybody, right? But we want them to know what to do if someone is violating their boundaries or not listening or making them feel unsafe. You can go ahead. Thanks. So the question isn't, do I know them or not? The question is this person trying to get me to break my rules? And does this person give me that uh-oh feeling? And for the parents who are listening, I would sort of add the third piece here, which is it's less about paying attention to people we don't know, and it's more about paying attention, this sounds horrible, paying attention to people who seem to like our kids more than we do, right? So if someone's offering to insert themselves into your family and do free childcare and come to every single baseball game and just be there all the time, just be wary of that, because, you know, that sense of grooming behavior, that behavior where little by little they break kids' rules, and little by little they break the rules of the family till it gets to the point where no one feels like that they can say, talk about anything or tell. It starts small, and it starts with really pouring out a lot of attention and affection. And here's the thing, our kids do need it. Yep, you're doing just, you can keep clicking on that, Brad. You're doing great. You're guessing, and you're guessing right. So that's great. I don't have the power of the clicker, so you're just, yeah. But it really is a lot of the cases that we see here with missing kids and with child abuse. It's about people who are just pouring on that attention and affection and then using that to cause harm. Now, positive attention and affection can be a great thing. You know, we're going to talk in a minute or two here about building your safety network and who your safety net adults are. But one of the things we have to be wary of is anyone who tries to insert themselves, you know, healthy adults, healthy friends want to be a part of your safety net. Unhealthy people want to be the only person in your net. And that's not how a net works. So paying attention to isolating behaviors, paying attention to secret keeping, and only you and I can talk about this, and that isolation, it's an important thing to talk to kids about. And one of the sort of conversation starters that we use with older elementary, like 3rd, 4th, 5th graders, is just the idea for those of them who've played sports. If you've ever played a game with an adult who doesn't know the rules, it's really hard as a kid to advocate for yourself, right? Like skating up to them on the hockey rink and be like, this isn't how to play the game. It usually doesn't work very well. So what we say is get out of the game to find an adult who does know the rules, because most do. And so in their lives, if they meet someone who doesn't know the rules about bodies or doesn't know the rules about the internet, they don't have to engage with that adult. We get off the screen, we get out of where we are, and we find someone who does know the rules, who can figure out what's going on. Because it's a kid's job to be a kid. It's a grown-up's job to keep them safe. We want to encourage our kids to talk to us if they meet someone who makes them feel unsafe. Oh yeah, that last bit, I was talking to Girl Scouts, and we do a lot of what if scenarios as safety building, because research tells us that kids will be like, I've got this all figured out about safety. When you go actually drill down to what ifs, that's kind of where they get stuck, and that's where the skill building really happens. So I was talking to Girl Scouts who are in middle school. I said, you know, what if you're on your computer and someone asked you to flash them with your shirt on their webcam? How would you handle that? One of the Girl Scouts raised her hand. She said, well, do I like them or not? And that wasn't the response that I was expecting, but I was really glad she asked, because it's realistic and it's accurate. And thankfully, she had a safe place to ask that question. So we have to let our kids know, even if it's someone our family knows and likes, even if it's someone from our neighborhood, from our faith community, who's forgotten the rules about bodies, or has forgotten the rules about safety, or has forgotten the rules about the internet, you don't have to explain the rules to them. Just get out and come and tell me right away. And even if we freeze and we don't say no, still not your fault. I still want to know about it. Sometimes our bodies just freeze when we're scared, and that's the same with everybody. Okay, you can go to the next slide, Brad. Thanks.
Can you advance with your butt?
There we go.
Oh, geez, sorry.
Okay, it's all good.
Oh my goodness.
This is called Technology in 2021. Anyone who's just been existing on Zoom for the last year and a half, we're totally is there with you, Brad, so don't worry about it. So yeah, who forms your net? Every kid, every teenager, every adult should have 5 people they can talk to when they need help, when they're overwhelmed, when things are just, you know, and using that safety net. Because sometimes we want to start talking about safety when kids are young. So when they hit those more tricky years, you know, 11 to 17, they have other people who are also reinforcing the same things that you are reinforcing. You know, you may have had the experience as a teenage brain develops, the part of their brain that learns how to argue, those neurons really start firing, and they often argue against their parents. And so, or their caregivers. So to have like your kid coming home from swim class and being like, oh, our swim coach today told us to not go meet people from the internet. And you're like, yeah, I've told you that since you were 5. But my swim coach told me, so now it's right. You know, so letting that piece of forming your net be a helpful thing to you, but then to pay attention to anyone who's trying to separate your kid from their net. That's not how nets work. And to talk about what isolating behavior looks like. And when we talk about violence prevention, so much in the 1980s, it was all about hardening the target. And in the 90s, and we're still kind of stuck in there sometimes, it's the least effective, and it's the tip of the iceberg to spend all of our energy on cover your drinks and tell someone where you're going, and put a light on your when you're like those. There are pieces for hardening the target that are helpful, but that's not long-term sustaining prevention. I don't know about the rest of you. When I went to driver's ed, I was taught how to thread the keys between my fingers to stab someone in the eye if I needed to. Never in my life have I had to stab someone in the eye with my keys. If you're the target, usually the last one to know if there's a problem. And so it's less about, teaching your kids to thread their keys through their fingers. And it's more about what we as an adults being active bystanders, going from bystanders to upstanders, what that looks like. If we're worried, could go back, thanks. I'm almost done on this one. It's just, there's just a little bit left here, Brad. You're with me. So the bystander, upstander, teaching adults that if something seems like a child is acting in a way where they're scared, or if you're seeing warning signs with an adult not listening to boundaries in your youth serving organization, if you're seeing what might be family violence in your neighborhood, to know that kids are relying on us to say something when we see something. It doesn't mean going after the person causing the harm. It means reaching out to get more resources, calling local child protection, calling law enforcement, calling a nonprofit like ours, finding the thing that fits best for you and your heart as we try to do its best on behalf of kids. And and then also finding those who are acting out and working with them to do no harm, right? Like the idea here is that when folks are reintegrated in the community, that they're given the tools so that kids don't get hurt. And if they are successful in that, that's our success. And so how do we encourage that to happen? And we know, and this is a whole nother conversation, but research tells us if folks can get employment, if folks can be surrounded by family, if folks have these supports, they're less likely to cause harm. So it's less about, vilifying this one person, because if they succeed, we succeed. And it's more about, I want to show you this picture. I want to tell you this person's moving into our neighborhood. They've shown us that they don't know the rules when it comes to kids and when it comes to being safe. So if you ever see them, I want you to come find me so that we can work on safety. But while we're talking about this one person, is there anyone who's ever made you feel unsafe? And if you ever found someone who doesn't know the rules about bodies or hasn't learned those rules, I want to know about it, because it's our job as adults to challenge those who are causing harm. So again, less about hardening the target, although that's a piece of it, and more about encouraging us as adults to act when we see that a kid's in trouble. Now you can go to the next slide. There you go. So Family Safety Night, you can see our website is jwrc.org. You can see that logo in the corner, jwrc.org. We use our website as you need to when it comes to what if games that we have on there and online safety tips. And we have some videos on that are free on our website of how to talk to kids about touches when they're very little. We have videos for how to talk to kids about pornography when they're older. So you can access the videos that make sense to you and your family. Empower Me, which is the prevention education that we provide in elementary schools. There's an overview for parents on what do we teach and why do we teach that. And it's a great thing to watch for parents and teachers, just to sort of get the vocabulary down and to help parents feel like they can have these challenging conversations. We can't expect our kids to come up to us at age 10 and start these hard conversations. We need to start them young and often. And one way to do that is just having a family safety night where you get together a few times a year and talk about safety. And when we think about, we may talk about where we're going to meet in case of a tornado. We might talk about that once a year, and it may never happen in our whole lives, but we have a plan. We can use that same, we talk about how to stay safe on the internet all the time. You may never feel unsafe on the internet, but I want to make sure that you have a plan and that you can talk to me if you're ever feeling unsafe. You might never meet someone who doesn't know the rules about bodies, but if you do, I want to make sure that you can talk to me and that I want you to be safe. Okay, you can go to the next one. Yep, so in a family safety night, if it's uncomfortable, acknowledge that it is. Use a lot of what if scenarios. You help them identify their 5 adults. And if they have someone you don't know, use that as an opportunity to meet that person. If they say like, oh, Mrs. Warren, my English teacher, she's my person. Like, reach out to the school, send an email, say, hey, Mrs. Warren, this has been a very exhausting, frustrating year for teachers. I want you to know that I see you and that I want to thank you for the work that you're doing. And my kid says they would come and talk to you if they had a problem. So thank you. Here's my name and number if I can ever be a help or if you're ever worried about my kid. Thanks for being a part of the team to raise my kid. If that teacher is one of the majority of teachers who are in it for all the right reasons and just trying to get through, imagine getting that email at the end of the day. And if that teacher is one of the rare teachers who's causing harm and you're like, hey, here's my phone number, my kid's talking about you, da, 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 like that involvement, like it's positive either way. So getting connected, keeping safety upbeat and positive, and it's not the talk. Kids have very different questions about their body when they're 4, when they're 14. And so it's ongoing talks with as challenges come up. Speaking of challenges, we do a lot of cell phone safety training as well at our agency. Another piece of what we do for parents. Yeah, the biggest prevention piece is adults invested in the fact that so many adults are here in a Zoom meeting when all of us are zoomed right and left. Thank you for making that happen. You can go to our website for information about family safety nights, connecting conversations, what ifs. We want to empower our kids. We don't want our kids to walk around scared. We want them to walk around smart. And the way that we do that is with age-appropriate positive education. We don't teach fire safety by telling kids what they feel like when they feel a 3rd-degree burn on their body. We say, in our family, we don't play with matches. And if someone wants you to play with matches, come tell me. Now let's do a what if. What if an older kid wants you to play with matches? Same thing with body safety. It's not sitting down and watching Law & Order SVU with a kid. It's saying, okay, in our family, we don't keep secrets about touches. So if anyone ever wants you to keep a secret about a touch, friend, adult, I want to know about it. So let's do a what if around that. Do you have any questions? So it's teaching the rule, following up with what ifs, and keeping it positive and empowering. And then the last one is my contact information, 1-800-325-HOPE, or sorry, and I believe, yeah, you can reach out to me directly. I need to update some of the slides just with contact stuff, but it's my first name, Allison, ALISON, at zeroabuseproject.org. So you can reach out to me at Allison with 1 L at Zero Abuse Project. Or even if you just want to call our hotline and problem solve, like, hey, I have a 6-year-old and my 6-year-old happens to have be on the autism spectrum. And so what would you suggest for the 6-year-old? Like, there's no one size fits all for any kid. And every kid is different. Every kid has their own needs. So sometimes just chatting about what might make the most sense can be helpful. So reach out to us if you ever need to do that, or send an email. We love to be a resource in this time. And I know a lot of you are stressed out about this, and I apologize. I wish I could end sexual violence, but I'm thankful for all the people working to end sexual violence on my team and beyond. So thanks to all.
All right. Thank you, Allison, and sorry for the poor clicking, but you rolled through it like a champ.
I would have given you an award for the clicking. It's all good.
Definitely. Other information I want to provide to you about your resources that are available is your local victim services group, the Missions Incorporated Programming, specifically the Home Free Community Program. Information like this, as you heard Allison talk about, no doubt as you've been experiencing through this presentation, has a way of unsettling us. Knowing what we know, with statistics being what they are, someone viewing this has probably either themselves dealt with this type of harm or has supported somebody that has survived this type of harm. And we want to make sure that as hard as we work at doing these meetings well and thoughtfully, that if we have triggered you in any way, I want you to reach out to the Home Free folks, and they will definitely provide you with all kinds of great resources and assistance that you so much deserve. To put kind of a bow on everything as we get ready to go into the Q&A portion, if you take nothing else away from all the stuff that we've thrown at you, and thank you for bearing with me. I know we try to cram a lot into the opportunities that we have here with the time with you. But if you take nothing else away, please let it be the 3 90s and the 2 Rs. And from what we know, from our research and data, and we know a lot, is that 90% of those individuals who engage in this type of harm, sexual harm, do not go on to reoffend in a same or similar fashion. 90% of those that do engage in this type of harm are known to the people they hurt, and they use that relationship and that trust to exploit that access. And so what all this means is that even if we could remove that 18,700 some individuals that are currently registered today and remove them from society and place them on the moon, we would not have impacted sexual harm in our state any better than 10%. 90% year after year of this kind of harm is perpetrated by those who are not known to the system as sex offenders. And so that broad awareness is just so very critical. Folks, it really does come down to that relationship piece. It is so much more telling than residence could ever be. Social proximity is going to lead to potential harm in far more ways than any geographical proximity ever could. Where these individuals lay their head at night is where their risk is at its lowest. It's where they spend their waking hours, where we want communities to have their awareness up and at its highest. A couple other resources. I want you to just take a screenshot of this or a snapshot. I don't want this to be the only information you receive on this important topic today. Certainly look at some of these and others as you get further into the information available. And then lastly, as far as state resources go, we have that Bureau of Criminal Apprehension criminal history search function that I mentioned earlier. If you are interested in this man or anyone's full criminal history, you just need the first name, last name, and date of birth, and you can look that up. It is available to you. And then the State Department of Corrections, where we maintain on our website all of the research and data that I've been sharing with you today in its pure form, where you can read through it yourself and draw your own conclusions. We also maintain a locator tool that is for anybody under the jurisdiction of the Department of Corrections. You can use that to look up anyone who you may want to know more information on. And then lastly, that public registrant search function, as I've discussed and described earlier. Now with that, I'd like to hand it back over to the chief to kick off Q&A.
All right, the chat lines are open, so please feel free to send in any questions that you have through chat. We will read those as part of the presentation and answer them live. Also, if you have any questions later on, you can certainly email them in to the email address that's on the screen right now. While we're waiting for questions to come in, I'd just like to remind everyone that our police department, we are aware of the predatory offenders that are in our community, at least the ones that live here. We do checks on registration checks on any registered predatory offender within the city, not just the ones that are subject to community notification. And another reminder that the recording of this presentation will be available on the City of Champlin website and the Champlin Police Department YouTube channel. So we are going to give this a couple minutes and see if we have anything come through the chat line. And also, while we're waiting on that, I would like to thank Brad, Allison, Dana, and Elsa all for being here to help us with the presentation today. We really appreciate it. And all the partnerships we've had with you guys over the years.
Absolutely. And I'll just say too, as we're waiting for questions to come in, I know with the more formal web-based stuff, there may be questions that you're just not comfortable asking. Do please reach out to either law enforcement, to your victim services folks, Allison and the JWRC, myself, or Dana and her team with Hennepin County Corrections individually, if you're more comfortable with that format. I just like to put that out there that this isn't just the end. And if you don't ask your question now, unfortunately it goes into the ether. No, we certainly will make sure any questions will get answered. Definitely.
All right, we have had one question come in. The question was, how can we receive information presumably from the city other than on Facebook? If they had not been following the police department on Facebook, they wouldn't have had any idea about our meeting. And that's a legitimate question. We do primarily use Facebook these days for the majority of our communications. We are actually looking at different types of services to use for community notification right now. And as we work through the budget process, we'll see how that all shakes out. There is a MailChimp service that we are currently using. And I know that some of those were sent out. I guess I don't know exactly how many, but if you are signed up for that service, you would have gotten notification that way also. All right, I'm not seeing anything else coming in right now. And just a reminder that if you have questions after the fact, after we're done with the live Zoom meeting, please feel free to email us at offender@ci.champlin.mn.us. Again, it's on your screen right now. I did get a follow-up here asking if we could include, if the information could be included in utility billing or some other city mailing. Yeah, we'll certainly look at that. Thank you. All right. Well, I would like to say, finally, I'd like to say thank you on behalf of the Champlin Police Department, the Minnesota Department of Corrections, Hennepin County Corrections, the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center, and Home Free. We'd like to thank all of you for your time and attention today. And again, please feel free to contact us with any questions that you might have. Thank you.